everybody. Welcome to Resistance Live. It is the 5th of March, 2025. And I don't know how many of you actually managed to watch the speech last night. I did the best I could until we hit the 2-hour mark. And then I was like, I'm going to bed. We're going to talk all about it because it was truly a horror show. It's probably the most effective way to put it. And we're also going to talk about the fact that there is a decision from the Supreme Court this morning on the withholding of foreign aid through USAID. Those of you who were here yesterday heard me say that you just needed to be a little bit more patient because I expected there was going to be a ruling in the next day or so. And lo and behold, here we are. Early this morning, that decision dropped. All right, first things first. Today, for our visually challenged viewers, I am wearing a brown kind of sweatshirty type thing today. It's a little chilly and rainy here. My hair is down. I'm a pink-skinned, green-eyed, dirty, blonde-haired woman. I have my thick gold hoops in, and I am in front of my bookshelf and my yellow utility cart and the big cushy chair. And I'm coming to you, as always, from occupied Muncie, Lenape, and Mohican land. Okay, so last night, Trump gave a non-State of the Union, State of the Union address to a joint session of Congress. And from start to finish, the entire thing was packed with hate speech. I know that it was very hard to watch for a lot of folks, and many of you opted not to. I will just say that while a lot of it was disgusting, none of it was new. And there were moments that were really, really weird. And there were also moments that were so crazy that I found myself kind of like laughing out loud at how weird they were. Of course, no surprises here. The Republicans were all in on every horrible thing that he said. All in on even the strangest moments, like a situation where he swore in a Black child with brain cancer as a Secret Service agent, where he used a young white blonde woman who had been hit in the head with a volleyball as a reason to argue that all trans people everywhere should be removed from sports. And, you know, there were a whole variety of other things like threats to invade Greenland and, you know, taking over the Panama Canal and all sorts of lies about the state of the economy and the impact of the ongoing tariffs and, you know, what that was going to mean for farmers and all sorts of other things. So it was really ugly and really gross. And none of that was unexpected, right? You know, I found myself at certain moments throughout it having this thing of like, this is actually just like one of his campaign Nazi rallies. There wasn't actually that much in it that was of great significance. And, you know, seeing the Republicans applaud for it didn't surprise me either because they're all in, right? But we have to talk about the Democratic response because I found myself throughout that entire event really disappointed. For those of you who watched, you know that Al Green, Representative Al Green, was the only person who stood up and shouted back at Trump at the very beginning of the speech. And he refused to sit down. He refused to be quiet. And he was eventually escorted out of the chamber by the sergeant at arms at the instructions of Speaker Mike Johnson. What I don't understand, frankly, is why there wasn't a huge line of people doing the exact same thing behind him, because it really did shake Trump at the beginning of the speech when Al Green did that. He went off script. He seemed really discombobulated. He did spend a fair amount of time during the speech itself kind of making comments about how none of the Democrats were standing and applauding for him. But I think it could have been a lot more effective if a lot more folks did that. Now, let me just say something about this. Yes, there were other people who walked out through the speech, but the cameras weren't on them. And I think the vast majority of Americans who were watching had no idea that other Democrats silently got up and left, like Maxwell Frost, like my rep from here in the New Jersey 11th, like, you know, folks like Jasmine Crockett. There was no live feed camera footage of those folks getting up and walking out. Bernie Sanders walked out toward the end of the speech. None of that was known unless you happen to be following along on social media. And I will also just say that I think this thing of color coordinated clothes and hand paddles in response to fascism was really kind of like feckless and weak. I was looking for constant disruption, which you know the Republicans would have done if the shoe was on the other foot. I was looking for the effort to stop Trump in his tracks from spitting out so much hate speech. And there really wasn't any attempt to do that either. Now, we learned after the event last night that that Hakeem Jeffries had actually actively urged people to not disrupt the speech. And I have to say that I think that that is just a sign of how unprepared the party leadership really is for this moment. We've had kind of a burgeoning sense about this over the last month and a half. And, I'm really in that place right now. You all know that I've given, the Democrats a lot of leeway over the years in terms of their response to this sort of stuff for strategic reasons. But I really feel like the ball got dropped last night in a really major way. And I think that, it's a good moment today to call the Hill, to call Al Green's office, to thank him for doing what he did. But it's also a really good day to call Hakeem Jeffries and Chuck Schumer and give them a piece of your mind about the fact that they couldn't even organize Democrats to have some kind of concerted, appropriate response, about the fact that, embodying decorum in the face of like a fascist coup is really not what we want. And I personally think that, people like AOC and Jasmine Crockett, who were very loud and all over social media. AOC didn't go. Jasmine Crockett was making TikTok videos after she walked out to describe what was happening. We need more of that kind of concerted response. But honestly, we needed disruption. We needed an event where like every Democrat was willing to be arrested to shut down his lies and his hate speech and his endorsement of fascism. That's really what we needed. And I really don't understand why the Democrats aren't getting it, like why they're not rising to the moment. And it's very disturbing, frankly. I was really, really disappointed. We did have a responsive speech from Melissa Slotkin that's gotten mixed reviews. Malcolm Kenyatta, my bud, took to MSNBC and gave a very fiery, off the record kind of response. He wasn't an official response himself. As always, he was brilliant. But we have not really seen that kind of concerted, organized effort in response to this that was necessary. And it's a big letdown. I have to say that like we need a real opposition party right now, and we don't have it. You can't play nice with fascists who are taking over the federal government and dismantling it. And that seems to be what they're trying to do right now. And it sucks. I'm just going to be honest. It sucks. Okay. We did have a really good ruling out of the Supreme Court this morning, as I mentioned. Again, a bunch of you guys yesterday were like, why haven't they ruled yet? And I said, it's only been 5 days. You got to give them like another day or so. And they ruled this morning. So it was a 5-4 decision to allow the lower court to enforce the requirements that USAID distribute already contracted for foreign aid. Very solid decision. However, the 4 people who dissented did so loudly, and these names will not come as any surprise to you. It was Gorsuch, Kavanaugh, Alito, and Thomas. The good news about this is that Amy Coney Barrett and Chief Justice John Roberts voted with the liberal wing of the court. And this was the first case that was ripe before the Supreme Court challenging one of Donald Trump's unconstitutional actions. Someone said to me this morning on the Patreon feed, why aren't there like so many more cases out there? Why aren't they doing this, in every instance that he's done something illegal? Well, there have to actually be formal appeals that have reached the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court can't rule on a non-live controversy. So this is the first case that they have ruled on, and it was a solid decision. And in essence, what it means now is that the lower court, Judge Ali, can go ahead and enforce this order, okay? And that there will be additional court proceedings, which will doubtless rise to additional appeals, okay? But I'm not going to look this gift horse in the mouth. Like, we needed a ruling like this. We especially needed a ruling like this after Trump did something really gross at the end of last night's speech and walked up to John Roberts and thanked him essentially for letting him off the hook through the immunity decision. Again, I have to remind you all, that immunity decision does not give Donald Trump criminal immunity from everything. There's so much disinformation out there about what this decision says. It does not say that he can never be prosecuted. It does not say that anything he does is immune from prosecution. It puts a window around acts taken within the purview of his presidential authority. But he did thank him. And Roberts didn't say anything. Roberts didn't smile. Roberts didn't nod, just shook his hand. So Roberts clearly knew that this decision was coming this morning. And I think that this is absolutely something to watch, because we have seen Roberts in some instances, and Amy Coney Barrett in the last couple of years, move more toward like an arguable center, which is still right wing on some issues related to presidential authority and other forms of dispute in the government. And so again, we will have to see what happens as these other many unconstitutional actions that have been taken by Trump and Musk and Doge and with JD Vance's endorsement rise through the court system to the Supreme Court. All right. But it's a good decision and I will take it. Right. Would it be nice if it was 9-0? Of course, but it's not. It's still a winning case. And that's good. That's really good. Okay. I tell you guys about some bad news this morning, which is that there is this kind of like noise afoot on the far right through Charlie Kirk and Ben Shapiro and others to try to get Derek Chauvin, who murdered George Floyd, pardoned. Now, I have to explain something to all of you. He was convicted in a state court prosecution. Donald Trump does not have the power to pardon him for the state court prosecutions. And the only person who actually has the power to pardon Derek Chauvin is, wait for it, Governor Tim Walz. So Derek Chauvin is not going to be pardoned for the murder convictions that were reached against him in state court in Minnesota, all right? But he also pled guilty to federal civil rights crimes after that initial trial where he was found guilty. And those can be pardoned by Donald Trump. Derek Chauvin is serving what's called concurrent sentences, which means he's serving time for the state convictions and the federal convictions at the same time. They're layered on top of each other. So if he happens to be pardoned by Donald Trump, first of all hell will break loose. But second of all, he's still going to be in jail because that murder conviction under state law is not going anywhere. So some of this is for show. Some of this is revoltingly designed to gin up the base. Because, you know, just like everybody was celebrating Daniel Penny being able to murder a black man on the subway, who has now been hired by Mark Anderson, who is, of course, one of the tech billionaires who's all in for Trump. You know, the prospect of pardoning Derek Chauvin for crushing, again, George Floyd to death on camera, murdering him, has some of these folks like frothing at the mouth. And, you know, again, I just wish some of these people would like put their hoods on. It's so obvious what's going on. There's also a push right now to have the mayor of DC paint over the Black Lives Matter street or lose some form of federal funding. So there's a lot of this like very overt racism happening right now, like really just revolting and, you know, obviously compounded over and over and over again. But I do want people to kind of grasp that the likelihood of Derek Chauvin ever getting out of prison is extremely slim. And so at least that's good. Now, for folks who have been commenting back to me about this, like all hell breaking loose means he'll invoke the Insurrection Act. Well, maybe, but I'm going to say something else. All right. The pardoning of Derek Chauvin for federal civil rights violations for murdering George Floyd should put people in the streets. Right. Like, again, I try my best here to kind of like modicum the outrage here and tell you guys what you don't need to be outraged about. That would be outrageous. It would be outrageous. And we don't let things like that slide, right? So, you know, again, you've got to kind of like consider the balance of factors here, right? And I would expect that if Derek Chauvin is pardoned by Donald Trump, there will be protests, and there should be. So, you know, again, things to think about going forward. Okay, we did have one development out of the State of the Union last night on the legal front that is awesome in its own way. Okay, so you all will remember that in one of the cases against Doge, the biggest case, the most significant case in my view, there are allegations that from various state attorneys general that Elon Musk and Doge are operating in violation of the Appointments Clause. We talked about this last week quite a bit on the broadcast. The Appointments Clause says that essentially you can't have an overarching job of massive responsibility. I'm totally paraphrasing. Massive responsibility inside the federal government without being appointed and confirmed by the U.S. Senate. This is the case, as I described it last week, that could take Elon Musk out of any responsibility inside the federal government. It's a very important case. In that case, Trump's DOJ has been arguing that they don't know who's in charge of Doge. It's definitely not Elon Musk. They can't figure out who it is. And then they come up with this really weird argument last week that it's this Amy person who was on vacation at the time that her name was spouted and like who has like literally no responsibility over anything having to do with Doge, that she is now the administrator of it, not Elon Musk. So last night in the speech addressing Congress, Donald Trump, because nobody ever accuses him of being terribly smart or strategic, referred to Elon Musk as the head of Doge to like standing ovations on the Republican side of the fence. It was mere hours, like 2.5 hours from that moment till an emergency notice of new evidence was filed in the Appointments Clause case that said, judge, and this judge who has, by the way, been expressing deep frustration with the attorneys in Trump's DOJ at not being able to answer this question, have called into question the reliability of their own declarations on this front, right? And said, how can you not know who's running this? You mean nobody will answer you as to who's actually in charge of Doge? This judge has been very expressive about their perspective on what Trump's DOJ is trying to do here. So now there is a notice of new evidence that has been filed in court that was filed literally at 2 a.m. that says, in one page, new evidence has arisen demonstrating that Elon Musk is the head of Doge in direct violation of the Appointments Clause. Here's the quote from the President of the United States in front of the joint address to Congress tonight, referring to Elon Musk as the head of Doge. That is going to kick up quite a bit of dust inside that courtroom, to the point that there's speculation this morning that there could be sanctions coming for the Department of Justice attorney who signed a declaration saying that he had no idea who the head of Doge was, that nobody had any idea who was running it. So, reminder, it is a civil case. That means Federal Rule of Civil Procedure, Rule 11 applies. And that means that if you make representations as an attorney in a court document that are false, the court can sanction you up to and including contempt. So we have yet to see how this is all going to play out. But I will tell you that it doesn't look good. None of this looks good. And, George Conway, I completely agree with him. He said this morning on Blue Sky that it was essentially a confession of judgment. In essence, what that statement did by Donald Trump was admit that, in fact, Doge is operating in violation of the Appointments Clause. And so is Elon Musk. That's the whole case. And they, of course, are seeking declaratory and injunctive relief that will remove Doge and Elon Musk from being able to do anything having to do with the federal government whatsoever. So this is kind of like the whole kahuna, so to speak, when it comes to trying to rectify the rampant destruction by the Nazi Youth Brigade inside the federal government as we speak. Again, we have yet to see what the judge is going to do with this, but it's really, really bad for Doge and therefore really, really good for us. Okay. We had some other breaking news yesterday that I just want to address, which is, and this dovetails with something that we talked about on the broadcast a couple of weeks ago. You all will remember that around the time that all the federal employees were ordered to go back to work in person, there was also an announcement by the GSA, the General Services Administration of the federal government, that they were terminating all land leases for federal buildings. Not all, but quite a few. And I said at the time, the next step of this is going to be that, just like Viktor Orban did, they will sell off federal buildings so that there's no place for people to go back to work. And so that it's much harder to rectify the repairing of the federal government when this whole thing collapses. Lo and behold, yesterday, it came to light that the GSA has now put dozens of federal buildings around the country up for sale. That includes, by the way, the building that houses the central heating for all of Washington, D.C.'s federal buildings. Don't ask me how they're going to fix that, but whatever. It includes the FBI building. So, this is not surprising if you're familiar in any way, shape, or form with the way autocracies work. The aim of this is also a grift, because it is an aim to sell these buildings to allies of the Trump administration, big real estate developers, at pennies on the dollar, so that those people can, again, get richer. And this is something that folks should be paying attention to. I mean, there are people joking around that we have an opportunity to do really fun things like crowdsource the purchase of the FBI building. But I'm just going to say one thing here, okay? I'm way more worried about what this means for the long-term stability of the federal government, because if the building and the spaces do not exist, yes, people can work remotely, but some of these buildings have been federal buildings for 100 years. And if they're gone, then on the other side of this, that's going to cause really serious problems for stability and rebuilding. So lots of things to be thinking about here. And I do want to point out, it's not just in DC. They're selling federal buildings all over the country. They're trying to sell the courthouse, one of the courthouses in the Central District of California, which is the district that houses Los Angeles. Los Angeles doesn't need courthouses. Again, very bizarre things. And, we'll see where this goes, because I'm just going to say one other thing. I would not be surprised at all to see litigation sprout up about this from us, in the states where the buildings are being attempted to be sold by, potentially people who work in those buildings. I have standing questions about that, but I know that good lawyers are hacking this out. So again, we will have to see how this goes. Okay. Final comment and question today was about town halls. So, as many of you know now, the Republicans, because of these town halls with Republican reps, have gotten really, really rowdy with Republican voters who are really displeased with what Elon Musk is doing. The national leadership of the Republican Party has advised Republican electeds to stop holding town halls. And a number of Democrats, including people like Tim Walz, have stepped in and said, I'll do a town hall in your district if your rep won't. I personally think this is a brilliant strategy. We need an opportunity here for Republican voters who are now doubting their votes to have a place to step in. All right. Whether or not this happens by, nationwide Democratic leadership is a really good question. But I know that there are some Democratic electeds who are already thinking about doing this sort of thing. I would encourage you to make some phone calls about this one as well. When you are making your calls to your electeds, if they are blue, ask them whether or not they're willing to do town halls in districts where Republicans are not. If you happen to live in a district that is represented by a Republican and the next district over is represented by a Democrat, this is a good suggestion to make. All right. But also, I just want to remind people that we have a lot of growing opportunities here for disruption, even if they don't hold town halls. So Mariam Kaba was making a suggestion yesterday, which I loved, which was for people to organize protests that are themed as billionaire balls in front of Republican offices in local jurisdictions, where people can dress up in fancy dresses and put on fake jewelry and, toast to the destruction of Social Security for the sake of billionaire tax cuts. Really make them dramatic and flourishing in a way that attracts news media and that has a direct purpose. Okay. Please remember that creative protesting is a really good idea, right? Especially if you can do it in such a way where it's going to draw some media attention. And again, you have to be thoughtful about what this means from a zoning perspective, but in most places you can show up and protest on a sidewalk, a public sidewalk, without needing a permit. And I just want to say that I think we need more disruption. We definitely need to keep making our phone calls. Again, I've made a bunch of recommendations today about this, generally speaking, but it's really critical also to think, how are you going to humiliate these Republican reps if they refuse to hold town halls? And there's lots of creative ways to do this. And again, the messaging of this is simple. They're cutting Social Security so billionaires can have tax cuts. They're cutting Medicare and Medicaid so billionaires can have tax cuts. They're cutting the Forestry Service and tearing down, putting deforesting national parks. This is something else that's on the docket right now. For the sake of making timber companies richer, billionaires richer, right? They're eradicating all sorts of social services like SNAP benefits, food stamps, so that billionaires can get richer. And we have to really start thinking about the ways in which we are going to get that message out to everyone, right? The reason why your eggs are so expensive is because they're giving billionaires tax breaks. The reason why farmers are losing their farms is because they want to give billionaires tax breaks, right? And because Trump has this insane tariff situation that makes no sense. Trump's done that to you, right? We need to talk about the fact that the reason why the economy is crashing is because they want billionaires to get richer, right? All of these are really good messaging. And, again, it's also got to be about the fact that Elon Musk is the richest man in the world and he thinks people don't deserve food stamps. So think very creatively about how you can make a difference and an impact. Again, I have to remind you all, in this era, all protests need effective messaging. If you do not know why you are there and what impact you are trying to have, you shouldn't do it. If you can't show up in front of a television camera and say, we're here to tell the people of this jurisdiction that Elon Musk is tearing down the government and Donald Trump is letting him do it so his billionaire friends can have tax breaks. You've got to be able to communicate incredibly effectively about what you're doing and why. What is the ask? We want Elon Musk removed from government, right? Just showing up randomly to protest is not effective, right? Just like we've talked about with the Tesla takedown protests, incredibly effective messaging, very clear points to what they're doing, right? tank Tesla's stock price, get people to sell their Teslas. So Elon Musk's value drops, through the floor. And so hopefully he leaves federal government and goes back to his day job, right? Very, very clear. Again, start thinking creatively about how you can make a difference here. All right. And again, I do want to remind you, mutual aid is where it's at. Local organizing is where it's at. As social services get put up on the chopping block, and Trump himself is like, farmers are in for a tough time. People are going to need each other more than ever. So it also, by the way, if it's not your day to stand in front of your Republican rep's office in a ball gown, you get involved in support organizations where you live. Make sure your community pod is safe and stable, and that people have food, and that they know they're safe. Okay. And my final plea for today is just one that's particularly special. All right. And it's this. There was an enormous amount of hate speech last night directed at trans youth. Really just vile stuff. So I have the benefit, because of some of the mobilization work I've done where I live here, to get some direct action training and information from the Trevor Project. And many of you know that the Trevor Project is a nonprofit that is dedicated exclusively to lowering the rates of suicide amongst trans youth. The biggest predictor of suicide rates among trans and non-binary youth is whether or not they are accepted where they live. And attempted suicide rates, the highest cause of attempted suicide rates in trans kids, I'm garbling this. Trans and non-binary kids between the ages of 10 and 14, attempted suicide is the highest rate of harm, meaning they're more likely to die from suicide than they are from anything else between the ages of 10 and 14. 10 and 14, these are babies. Please make a donation today to the Trevor Project. If you've got any spare cash, please do it, because they're already tracking increased rates of attempted suicide and suicide among trans youth since Trump has been elected. And it is desperately important that our trans and non-binary kids know that we love and care for them, and that mental health support is available. All right. That is my request today. All right. Lots of love to all of you. Please remember that if you like what we do here, I would love a thumbs up here. If you're watching on the replay, drop me a comment, because it tells the algorithm that you like what we do. Don't forget to subscribe. You can share this with all your friends. And if you want to support this broadcast in other ways, you can join us at patreon.com/resistancelive to ask questions and join Progressive Coffee Hour every weekend. So grateful to those of you who support the broadcast financially. It helps to keep this work going. You can also click join here to live chat here on YouTube. And love you guys. Take care of yourself today. Please keep your eyes peeled, because there's going to be lots more developments on the tariffs and other things. By the way, a U.S. company bought ports at the end of the Panama Canal yesterday. So, I fully expect there's going to be some effort to just not let people Trump doesn't use the Panama Canal, which is going to completely disrupt world trade. In any event, lots of things to watch. I will be here tomorrow at regular time, and I will see you all then. Take care, everyone. Bye.